All right, so this webinar is Small Changes, Big Impact, Making Library e-resources impossible to miss. And we have Michelle Newcomb here, who's the Communications and Development Coordinator for the Manhattan Elwood Public Library District in Chicagoland, and is a 2025 LMCC Best of Marketing Public Library honoree, an accidental marketer who loves creative problem solving. She's dedicated to helping others feel confident and capable as they navigate library marketing. And I will hand it over to Michelle to lead us today.
Thank you so much, Devin. Hi, everybody. Hello from Chicago. I'm so excited to see so many friends from North Carolina. I've never been to North Carolina, so I kind of feel like I get to travel vicariously through you all today. Hopefully, it's a teeny bit warmer there than it is here today. So they asked me to be here today because a couple months ago, I spoke at the Library Marketing Communications Conference, and a few folks from NC Live saw me. And they discovered we can all have something in common. And it's that challenge of getting people to notice and actually use our e-resources. So like Devin said, I'm kind of an accidental library marketer. I've been in this role 2.5 years or so. And while our e-resources were doing okay, they weren't doing great. So a few months ago, I shared some of these, kind of small changes that I made, kind of doable, intentional changes that really resonated with my friends at NC Live. So here today, I'm going to share a little bit of what worked with me, and not as a web designer or any kind of marketing expert, because I am neither of those things, but as someone who's figured out all those kinds of things kind of one step at a time. And I have a suspicion that a lot of you are probably in very similar position. So let me start by asking you a question. How many of you have ever heard that dreaded phrase, I don't know the library had that? And if you've never used Mentimeter before, you see that QR code on your screen. You can scan that QR code and it will give you access to answer these questions. And we've got a couple of them spread throughout here just so keep everybody awake. I know it's the middle of the afternoon. It's Tuesday after holiday. I am not surprised. I'm already seeing all of these responses ping back at they're all yes. And you can continue plugging in. I am, again, 1000% unsurprised. There was a YouGov study in April of 2024 that said, well, 47% or so of our patrons do borrow books and things like that. Only 15% access our digital resources. So a staggering disparity there. And a huge portion of our communities aren't accessing this wealth of free library resources that we have to offer. So we all have a lot of work to do.
Hey, Michelle.
Yes, ma'am.
Could you take out your headphones? I just want to see if that's what's causing a little bit of feedback with the audio. Folks are just mentioning in the chat. Okay, now we can't hear you. Uh-oh. Let's see.
There we go.
There we go. Yeah.
Yay.
Okay, awesome.
Sorry about that, guys. Just trying to prepare just in case there was at home today, and I have a dog who loves to make his presence known, but he has quieted down. So hopefully we can keep that up. So yeah, we have a huge portion of our communities that aren't accessing those resources. So what can we do about that? Why? Why is this happening? And I know I've joked with my colleagues before that the only thing I hadn't tried was sending carrier pigeons out, and people still weren't getting these messages. And sometimes those great resources get missed because we librarians don't think like patrons anymore. We kind of make assumptions about how much our patrons know, and we know what Kanopy is, right? And how great it is. But to the average person, they're going, what's a Kanopy? That's just not translating to our patron base, what some of these resources are. We tend to be a very information-oriented group. We like to pave our road with good intentions and academic language, and it's a lot of the times a lot more than our patrons need. And we tend to spend a lot of time talking to our patrons in our buildings without looking at where else we can make a difference. So that kind of more is more tendency that we have. towards our library marketing doesn't do us any favors either. So here's kind of what we're looking at today. If any of that felt familiar, you're definitely not alone. And it's definitely a judgment-free zone because I think we all are reaching different points in our library marketing careers and figuring this out. It's pretty new, you know, facet of library life, one piece at a time, and it can be hard. So now we know some of those reasons why people are asking those questions. The big question becomes, how do we turn all those whys into actual usage? So it feels a little overwhelming sometimes, I think. So instead of tackling everything at once, we're going to do this kind of one small bite at a time. Today, I'm going to share some ways to make marketing e-resources feel a little less daunting, especially knowing that we all work in different sized libraries with different staffing structures and different tools at our disposal. So I'm going to intentionally focus on ideas that are practical and flexible and adaptable. So I'm not going to talk about specific platforms or really highly technical stuff because I know not all of us have that in our toolbox. But if anything that I bring up today is something that I've been able to do, and if I can do it, then definitely all of you can do it. So, and my last caution is, and you're going to hear me say this several times probably, there is no do everything everywhere plan in my playbook. I want us to focus on making small changes a piece at a time. With that in mind, I want to pause here for that moment because that idea really sits beneath everything we're going to talk about today. It's not about adding more tasks to our already full plates, right? We're making very small and intentional changes to the work we're already doing and making sure that that work is shared within our organization. Even a library like mine, where I'm the only person with a marketing role, I'm not doing any of this alone. It all works because I have programming staff and frontline staff and administrators all playing kind of important roles in um, marketing these things. So my job isn't to do everything myself, it's to connect all the dots so that work feels manageable. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. So we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about some very doable web fixes. So if people can't find or understand what's going on in your website, then nothing else works, right? They're never going to find those e-resources or use them. We're going to talk about email and social media strategies that will actually work and how to use them intentionally without turning them into extra work or a lot of frustration. From there, we're going to look at reaching beyond the library walls through outreach and partnerships so that message doesn't live only with us and in our buildings. And finally, we're going to wrap with programs and events as marketing secret weapons because they do create some of the most natural moments for discovery for our patrons. So let's start in that place where most people interact with our e-resources, our websites. And I know that a lot of frustration lives on some of our websites. It's also where some of the smallest changes can have really an outsized impact on whether or not people really use and find our e-resources. So again, when I say totally doable, I really, really mean it. This section isn't about huge, expensive redesigns or rebranding or anything like that. It's about identifying places that stall patrons on their journey between deciding to check out any resource and actually using those resources. You would be surprised how like teeny small front end changes on your website make your e-resources even more visible, even if you don't control the entire site. And before we talk about what is possible, I want to acknowledge that there's possible pushback that sometimes shows up in people's heads when we talk about changing websites or tinkering with websites. So here's our second Mentimeter. You can scan in or add that code at menti.com. In 1 to 2 words, just what's your most common frustration with your website? Is it that you don't have time to deal with it? Maybe it's not your job. Too much info that hits me right in the feels. We have a huge EBSCO package from the state of Illinois, and I cannot, for the life of me, put every single one of those on there. Just no way. You got an IT person who drives you absolutely bananas, won't do what you want. Yeah, too much. It's invisible. Too much. I feel ya. Cluttered. Yep. Don't know it exists. That hurts me too. Locked down by county. Ooh, that's really interesting. Ugly, I also feel. Convoluted the time. It's hard to find. All right. we're going to touch on a little bit of all of these things, I think, or quite a few of them. So thank you guys so much. College control. Yeah. I know some of you guys don't have control over some of that. We're going to talk about how to maybe have those conversations a little bit. Awesome. Thank you guys. So obviously we all have frustrations. A lot of them are similar, so that's something. But whether they be big frustrations or small frustrations with their websites, let me start by just sharing a little bit of mine. Um, and with the caveat that if you were to go to mpld.org right now, it is a hot dang mess because we had a malware attack and we are rebuilding it. So it is in this very 1998, barely functional mode right now. So please don't judge me or our website work by what's going on right now. We're supposed to have a meeting tomorrow with a design team who's rebuilding it for me. So yes, I'm talking big game about not rebuilding, but they're rebuilding it with a lot of these changes in mind. So time back in. I inherited this WordPress site in 2023, and I spent countless hours fixing it and breaking it and fixing what I broke over and over again, trying to get what I wanted and to make it prettier and to make it more functional and to make it easier for patrons to find things. And I still really couldn't get them where I wanted them. And I actually at one point did implode our homepage, which was a whole thing where I thought I might die of a heart attack, and I did not. When I stopped and finally processed kind of what the real problems were and was able to fix some of the oopses I did, I found that there was a more manageable way to make resources relevant without making my hair grow whiter than it already is. And just finally realized how much more control I had, not because I was doing something huge. It's not because it needed a huge overhaul or that the wheel needed to be reinvented. What I needed was to think about changes on a much smaller scale. So think about making small changes like making sure your labels and your descriptions are clear, making sure patrons have the clearest path to what they're looking for. They're actually shockingly doable little changes, and it's not something you need to do a big overhaul to do. And I know some of you have, a website that's somewhat out of your control, or it's under a webmaster, it's controlled by the college or whatnot. I would suggest if I know you might not have a ton of flexibility, but it might be worth having a conversation about making some of those changes just to like things like wording or things like that. Not about like nitpicky, I don't like the color scheme or things like that, but talking about how those patrons interact and how to improve it from a user experience standpoint, not a personal preference standpoint. They might be a little more welcoming to that conversation. So here are some of these small tweaks that I would suggest having a peek at and maybe reevaluate your website with some fresh eyes. I like to think about this as friction points, right? So when our users decide to check out our e-resources, they have momentum. They have decided to go to the website or they have seen a flyer somewhere, or whatever the case might be. With any luck, the journey from when they make that decision to actually getting to and using our e-resources is swift and uneventful and smooth, right? Inevitably, some friction points will exist that will at best slow down their momentum and at worst halt that momentum entirely. I don't know about anybody else here, but I am a huge space nerd, and now I'm thinking of it from an Artemis standpoint, right? Like there are all of those points that could have slowed down the launch, scrubbed the launch, made them have to turn back and not go all the way around, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of this a much smaller, less life-threatening scale. That's kind of what I'm talking about. So I want to help you identify some common points of user friction so that you can hopefully make some thoughtful updates that are going to smooth out those points and make your users' journeys as smooth as possible. So with that in mind, here are 3 kind of doable website fixes I want you to consider, and we'll take a look at each one. If you've got any kind of clunky or unintuitive navigation, it's a huge source of user friction, and we're going to look at some examples of that. We want to organize our resources in a way that makes it easy for patrons to find. If your patron has to think about a pun to understand the link that it leads to, or figure out any other kind of complicated language, that's going to cause user friction. We want to use plain and friendly language. And finally, a lack of confidence is kind of a hidden friction point. We want to show them how it's done with some tutorials or screenshots or step-by-step guides, kind of to demystify those resources and make them feel more accessible to our patrons. So like I said earlier, we're making a lot of assumptions all the time about our patrons' knowledge, and how that kind of gets in our way. To understand these friction points and fix them, we need to get into that mind of a patron. So I'm going to take us on a little tour like we're a patron. So our first big source of user friction is usually unnecessary clicks getting in the way of getting to our resources. And I'm really sorry to break the glass on this point to you, because once you start seeing it, you're going to notice it on all kinds of websites everywhere. So my first apology is to the Tempe, Arizona Public Library. This is their digital website page. Literally, this is their whole page. Like this bottom part where it says contact and hours and Tempe PL, that is the bottom of their screen. This is their digital resource page. It literally has if you go from their homepage, you click digital library, it takes you to this page. But what even is it? There are no digital resources here whatsoever. There's a paragraph, which, spoiler alert, nobody is going to read, and a link that tells you to go to the digital library. I thought I was supposed to be in the digital library already, and apparently I'm not. This whole page is an unnecessary click. In order to get to the actual resources, I have to click on that digital library link at the bottom of that paragraph, or I need to go to those like links on the side there, which are not super explanatory unless I'm specifically here to look at genealogy, right? My first move, if this were my website, is I would make this landing page with the resources or maybe some guiding categories. But this to me seems like a very useless click. So when you go and you click one of those resources, or one of those links, I clicked on the digital library link at the bottom, you end up here. And this is a friction point that grinds my gears a little bit. You land on an A to Z database link. And in my librarian heart, where I love to keep things organized, this is lovely. I love A to Z lists. As a patron, this is not a friendly choice, right? Because patrons don't search by database name. No 13-year-old who needs homework help is going to look specifically for Gale in context, right? The best hack to remember is that patrons are usually trying to solve some kind of problem or are looking for something in particular, not a list of 34 A to Z possibilities, which is what we have here. So how do we smooth that friction point out? My first thing is I'm asking myself, all right, what kind of problems are my e-resources solving? And then use our patrons' most common questions to help us organize, because organization is one of my very favorite kinds of marketing. It's just, while A to Z makes my heart happy, it does not make my patrons happy. So I'm going to have to reorganize these a little bit differently. So now we've traveled to North Dakota, and this library is doing a better job than our friends in Tempe. They have some really helpful headings and categories, which are both on their e-resource page. And having those categories does a lot to help funnel our patrons to the resources they're looking for. So, for example, if I'm a patron and I'm coming in here and I know that I am on the hunt for a new job, I can go straight to career resources and I can avoid all of those unnecessary clicks for all these other resources that I'm not interested in. If they're able to quickly find what they're looking for in very few clicks, you're going to see a lot less friction and a lot more engagement. My only complaint with West Fargo is that it has an extra click to reach this page. So when I click on their resource button, or I click on these categories, I end up on another page. So then I have to click again on the actual content, but I could live with that. It's significantly better. But I wish I could click straight to career resources from the homepage, for example. Oh, wait, I lied. They solved that problem too. They actually do have a drop-down menu from their homepage. So if I go to their main homepage, I can immediately go to that drop-down menu, pick the category I want, and zoom. I'm already right there. So I've actually skipped a whole page, and I get direct navigation there. So that takes a huge friction point away And I really love that. It keeps that momentum going and it gets them there much, much faster. This is my final example. This comes from my friends at Sacramento Public Library. I worked with one of their resource librarians recently, and they have a really interesting philosophy, and they treat their resources like part of their collection. So if you go to their website to peek at it, this page really shows that. It's really fascinating. I've never seen another library behave in that way, and I like it a lot. What I love about their library is they have a really robust list of categories. So it's a screenshot, so I can't scroll down for you, but they have no fewer than 26 categories for their patrons to choose from. So should you want to recategorize your e-resources to make it a little easier, so you can pare down that information overload when they go on their e-resource page so they can just see the specific things they're looking for, having those categories to funnel them. Sacramento has some great ideas or places to start. They do a really great job of using these categories as a way to market. I can find the types of things I'm looking for even if I don't know what the resource is called. And I like that all those resources are together so that if I'm looking for a specific one, but I go to the general category and I see there's 2 or 3 other ones that I might try, it's like walking to the shelf and finding 4 books on the thing you were looking for in the nonfiction section, right? When you were only looking for one, it's really very convenient. So let's go back and think like a patron again. What points of friction does my website have? Are any of them something I can smooth out, right? And then consider what problems do your e-resources solve for your patrons, and you can use those answers to organize. So that's kind of how, when I was looking at my e-resources, I used kind of those points to think through, okay, what categories do I need? How can I make it punchier, make sure that I've got quick access points for my patrons? So before you write any of those lovely category titles, let's talk about the language that we choose. Because guess what? Our word choice can also cause a lot of friction for our patrons. And I'm going to be the very first to admit that when we get a new resource, I'll often go to the vendor and see how they describe those resources because I just don't have time, right, to become an expert in every single one of them. I'm a one-woman show. But I'm going to caution you not to use that vendor verbiage verbatim. That was a lot of V's. Uh, they're usually tailored to us, right? They're usually tailored to the librarians, not to patrons. So they're very jargon heavy and are full of librarian friendly buzzwords, but they're not necessarily written to make a patron want to click on it. So I want you to think of your e-resource page kind of like an airport, right? There are places you have to go through, hopefully as quickly and efficiently as possible, so that we can get to the good stuff later, right? So when you are thinking about your website in that way, you're thinking of how to write descriptions for those e-resources, for example, don't bog yourself down in words. No paragraphs. They're looking to skim, right? If you're looking for something really quick, you're not going to stop to read 6 different paragraphs about 6 different resources before you click on something, right? You want to consider that our patrons might be reading using screen readers. So if you've got a paragraph that's also a long time, they've got to listen to until they can click or until they tab over or whatever the case might be. So we really need to deal with some of that wording before we move on. So instead of writing everything from categories and descriptions, button text, I want you to write those things like you are explaining it to a friend who's kind of in a hurry. So aiming for very friendly language at like a 4th or a 5th grade level. And I know that sounds kind of patronizing, but most patrons aren't super comfortable with wordy academic language, and it can actually be a barrier to usage for our e-resources. So write for short attention spans, write for clarity, and write for support. Bullet points are going to be easier for your patrons to engage with than paragraphs. And if you can, if there's, an important word in there somewhere that you know is going to just grab that patron by the eyes and make them click, put it in bold if you can. Make them feel like it's going to be easy and they've got this. and they don't need an advanced degree to use whatever that resource is. So plain language will defeat that friction of wordy academic descriptions every time. And I hadn't said it specifically, but make sure that you are putting at least a brief description. If you are just putting that lovely logo, they don't know what it means, right? Again, what's a canopy mean? What does EBSCO mean? If you're not somebody who's spent your life doing research or whatever, they're not going to have an idea. You need to give them a little bit of a guidepost there. One friction point that we don't think about is that piece of hesitation, right? A lot of patrons hesitate to click on our e-resources because they're not sure what they're going to experience when they get there. It's going to be hard to use. Is it for someone like me? Am I going to hit a paywall or a login wall? Will I immediately feel lost in there? If we provide them with kind of a quick peek so that they can see what they're getting into before they click, we can remove that, oh, what is it going to look like moment. It helps patrons feel a little bit less like they won't get lost, right? So there are a few relatively simple ways that we can do this. And you do not have to do this for every single resource, right? We're not making too much extra work for ourselves, but maybe for your real high usage ones, it might be worth thinking about. I would start by asking my coworkers, especially my friends who are at the desk or who are helping patrons with these kinds of questions, what they're hearing from patrons. So if you have a particular app that your library uses or a particular e-resource that patrons use regularly, are there any parts of the login process or that early process of finding their information that seems tricky? Do we have a lot more questions from seniors who might need a little extra support because they're just not particularly comfortable with our e-resources? Is there some kind of confusion about any kind of upfront feature on that resource? Then once you kind of have some things you want to help your patron work through, pick an avenue that's going to help to educate them so that they feel more successful when they get there. So if you are able to add the odd screenshot, that can go a long way. I don't usually put those on my website, but I will put them in an email instead of like another logo that won't necessarily make sense to them. Sometimes that helps to get a peek what they're looking at. Having a step-by-step walkthrough or a how to get started guide can be enough. And it doesn't have to be a high production video. I am not a production video creator by any means. If you look on your right side of the screen, I actually have several how-to guides linked on my website. And I have several just for junior high kids who do research with me, for example. But I've used an online app called Scribe, and I'm able to do step by step. I just click and it copies what I do on the screen. And that's really helpful because you can just get them started, get that ball rolling, and that helps. And again, you're not being a content creator and editing a video or anything like that. If you do prefer videos though, and you don't feel comfortable making them, there are platforms out there like Niche Academy that can make that process a lot simpler. There's a screenshot here on the left from Las Vegas County's library. They use Niche Academy's pre-made tutorials and they're able to embed them onto their relevant pages of their website. That page is about health and nutrition. So they've got all of their health and nutrition e-resources on there, and then they have links to new books and things that they have on there and whatever blog posts they might have. And then that little tutorial bar just follows you up and down the screen and it clicks and opens just the relevant tutorial videos, which is really great. And it's really, really easy to embed them. But if you can make sure patrons can get to where they're going smoothly without over-clicking, reading lengthy descriptions, and you can empower your users to use your e-resources, it's going to go a long way to getting those resources seen and used. So we've looked at making them easier to discover by using categories. We've made that, and we've learned about our great language. We've learned about making sure that we're helping our patrons use those things. But now we get to do some of the fun stuff, which is advertise them. Your website is going to be your #1 marketing tool. So it's a perfect place to highlight e-resources. Take a little bit of time. Look at your website with a fresh set of eyes, or maybe ask a friend or a family member or another trusted non-librarian to take a look. Sometimes, again, we need to take our librarian hats off and put our patron hats on. See if you can find a couple places where An ad for a highlighted e-resource might grab attention. So maybe a highlight slider or a sidebar on your home page, or rotating spotlight on your e-resources page. Or if you have a relevant service page like we just saw from Las Vegas libraries where they had, for example, a health information page, those are good places to start with those. But a word of caution on that. Have you ever watched patrons browse your physical collection? And they usually start and stop by looking at displays, right? They don't usually wander through the stacks and look at every single title because it ends up spoiled for choice, right? We show them everything at once and then they end up with decision paralysis. They don't pick the best option, they pick none because there's too many choices, which is obviously not what we're going for. We want them to click and use our resources. So even though you may be tempted to highlight a ton of stuff, don't. I know it's tempting. Oh, well, if I put one e-resource on that slider, I can put 3 e-resources on that slider. Don't do it. Featuring just one e-resource at a time will make discovery easier. It makes patrons feel more confident because they're not overwhelmed trying to choose the best option. It gives them one purpose and one clear reason to click. And I know, and I have fallen into the same trap. You know, I have 3 genealogy resources. I should highlight all of them so they get the full picture. But when you highlight everything on the page, right, when you go back, nothing's highlighted anymore, right? It's all covered in yellow. We don't want to do that because when we highlight everything, nothing stands out, right? Same thing applies with our e-resources. When you highlight one e-resource, just like when you highlight one small passage in a textbook, you're not limiting access to all the information in the text. You're just shining a spotlight on the most important thing. So choose a database of the month, or feature an e-resource in an email, or tie a tool to a program or an event. In my honest suggestion, if you can use the same e-resource for all 3 of those things, kudos, because then you've gotten 3 points of access out of one ad, which is pretty awesome. So those featured moments kind of quietly tell you to like start here. And once they've had some success using one of your e-resources, they'll discover, oh, you have other helpful e-resources that are like that. And like I said, when you've got those category pages, or you've kind of got them organized even on one web page by category, you know, they can discover, oh, you have more that I can choose from, and I'm going to start here. Kind of take some of that guesswork out of them. So that's a lot of info. It's a lot of small changes that add up over time, though. And I really want you to remember that you don't have to do all of this by yourself. Ask your coworkers what patrons struggle with, use that information to help you decide what to highlight or create tutorials for. Share that tutorial creation or that blurb writing or content creation. If you've got somebody who's got a skill set that can help you, recruit them and have them help you. I collaborate across departments all the time because that helps to have multiple points of access within your building and without. And if you can reuse content across departments, you're going to have the most likely use of your resources. So kind of my takeaway here, you don't need to change everything. You don't need to redo your whole page. Just make some things clearer, right? Remove those pain points, those friction points for your patrons. Make your language clear and easy to understand, and make patrons feel comfortable trying something new. Don't go overboard trying to do everything at once, right? We ain't got time for that. Do your best with one thing at a time and work from there. Whew. So now that our websites are maximized for engagement, let's get people there using email and social media, but let's do it with some intention. Our goal should be to get the right message to the right place and the right people. So Mentimeter time, everybody wake back up. So out of sheer curiosity, how many social media platforms does your library use? Awesome. I'm like watching it grow on my other screen. Okay. That's pretty doable. You guys who are up there with like 3 and 4 and 5 or more, bless you. That's a lot. Um, you know, the more of these platforms we use, I feel like the more complicated it becomes and the harder to parse it becomes, right? Because Do we need to post every post on every channel, right? Does our TikTok set need to know about our new like 55 and over learning service, right? Like there's some decisions that need to be made there. And I hope you're already doing some of that. We'll talk about that a little bit. Thank you for humoring me. I was curious, and also it makes me feel a little better about myself because we only use two as well. We're very tiny. Um, when it comes to email and social media, I think a lot of us fall into what I call the spaghetti solution. We take a lot of perfectly good pasta and we start like throwing it at the wall and hope some of it sticks, right? And some of it probably does, and that's great. But when you keep throwing more pasta there, you start pulling some of the noodles that had already stuck down because you've kind of overdone it, right? And in the end, you're tired, your floor is covered in starchy stuff, you've ruined a lot of perfectly good pasta, and I'm Italian, so I'm against that, right? So I want you to pause when this happens, and I want you to think about this particular idea. We are never going to get every user to use every resource. We wouldn't want to, first of all, right? Because not every resource is meant for every patron. We wouldn't expect that kind of behavior from a book on the shelf. We're not necessarily going to get every patron to use an e-resource, but we also don't get every patron to use every kind of physical resource we have either. So our goal shouldn't necessarily be maximum noise and having ads here and there and everywhere. It's creating the maximum impact for the time and energy that we actually have. So we need to stop treating every digital channel the same. Instead, we need to look at the tools in our toolkit and use them for what they're actually good at. So let's start with the one that's probably been quietly doing most of the work for you all along, which is your email. And I know email, it's not flashy, it's not as exciting as social media, but in this world of like just constantly changing algorithms and platform overload, email remains steadfast and popular. Like if you're not a Twitter person or an X person and you're an Instagram person, you're probably both still going to have email, right? It makes sense. It's a real powerhouse. Think about it. With email, we can reach the people who already care because they're already in our list, right? It's great for detail and follow through. We can do a lot more with it than we can, for example, social media. And we can easily connect patrons directly to our e-resources. So when I took over our email marketing a few years ago, it was in pretty rough shape. We sent one huge email to our entire email list every single week. We would repeat the same ads and graphics over and over. There were no clear calls to action. There were no buttons. There was nothing to really guide anyone to our website or our e-resources. And unsurprisingly, our open rate was only 17%, which is not great. Our click to open rate was just squeaking over 1%. I started looking at it and started doing my homework, and I made a couple of changes. Number one, as I stopped sending to the full list every week, we started looking at the people who actually visit our library and who our patrons are, and we started creating segmented email lists so that the right messages got to the right audience. And then we focused on one resource per email when we were including resources in emails. So it was clear in a single, next step, right? So we weren't flooding them with like every single e-resource we had in every email. We weren't going to do that. Our results, I'm pretty happy with. Last year, our average open rate was 59%, and our click to open rate was nearly 4. So in 2.5 years, our email open rate increased over 40%, which is well above library industry standards. I'm still pretty happy with it. And the best part was that nothing that we did was super technical. It wasn't complicated. They were choices that we made strategically and intentionally with some small shifts in how we did things that paid off. So I'm going to talk about the biggest shift which we made, which was from sending out that one broad email a week to sending out targeted ones. And what I want you to internalize here is that when we talk about email, the goal isn't necessarily send more emails. It's send the right email to the right people at the right time. And when that message is going to make the most impact. So broad emails, you try to reach everyone, and they usually resonate with no one. I think we've all seen that movie where they tried to make everybody love it and then nobody loved it because it wasn't really meant for anybody, right? Targeted emails are a little quieter, they're a little smaller, but they are much, much more effective. So let me give you a real world example. Um, I send a monthly newsletter out to teachers at our local school districts. In December of 2024, I sent out my monthly newsletter, and the title was Teacher Sanity Savers for the Holidays. And inside, I highlighted Tumble Book Library. That was all I highlighted in there. There was not a long list of resources. I did not explain how our entire digital collection worked. I just showed them how Tumble Books solved a very specific December, everybody is stir crazy, and we're just trying to corral the kids until dismissal problem. The result of that email was that our Tumble Books usage went from 0 uses the previous December to over 800 uses that month. And what mattered just as much is that teachers went back to it. They remembered. In May of that school year, our usage jumped from 0 the previous May to over 3,000 uses without a follow-up email. So finding that sweet spot made all the difference. It wasn't because my email was fancy, and it wasn't because I blasted it to everyone who had ever given me their email address. It was because I targeted it. It was at the right time and it was useful to its audience, which is the main difference between broad, just spaghetti at the wall email and targeted email. When email really works best is when we KISS, right? Keep it simple, insert other S word that feels most comfortable to you there, right? Start with something clear and short subject lines because people are busy and they're scanning. They shouldn't have to guess what's in that email, right? Inside the message, I try to stick to one main idea or theme. So one resource, something that's, for example, in February, we talked about health. So we had health resources. I highlighted some health programs and I highlighted one health e-resource and everything tied together, and it worked really well. When I try, like I said, I try to stick to one main idea and one resource. Then, and this is the important part, I tell people exactly what to do, right? They're there, they see it. There's a button. Click here to try X. Get started with Y. Use Z with your students. Make sure there's a clear follow through, a clear action step, right? That call to action is so super important. So when your email is simple, when it's specific, when it feels helpful instead of overwhelming, that's when people are really going to engage with it. It's going to give us space to explain and add context and be really clear about what something does without muddying the water with a ton of extra or unrelated information. Now, social media, on the other hand, does not work that way. That's not a bad thing, right? Social media just has a different job. Social media's job is to get the click, not to explain everything. And I think sometimes we expect a lot out of our social media presence, and we try to teach everyone everything about our resources with it in one post. And we have these long graphics with all these words, which, by the way, are not accessible, which is a problem for myself included. Something I'm constantly working on. It's just not how people are interacting with these platforms. It's not really the most functional way to use it. Social media is fast. It's very visual. People are scrolling. Think about how you scroll when you're riding on the couch after work. You're not reading all the text on every single thing. You're going pretty fast, right? So instead of treating social media like a destination for patrons, I like to think of it as a vehicle, right? Its job is to grab our attention, is to spark a little curiosity, and then move on to somewhere else, to our website or our landing page, or even into the building to use those resources. So if someone's spending a whole lot of time reading your social media post, it's because they haven't clicked yet, and we want them to click so that they can get to the resource. When social media works best for e-resources, it creates just enough interest to make the next step feel easy. So if you're using multiple platforms, taking a few minutes to really think about who your target audience is will go a long way as well. Make sure that you are advertising. For example, we have Get Set Up from Gale, which is a new resource that's for seniors 55 and over, and that's great. But again, we probably don't need to play that on TikTok. We may not need it even on Instagram. Throwing ads like spaghetti all over all our platforms is probably not going to necessarily pay off. We need to be more specific. With the idea of social media being a vehicle in mind, how do we make that work for us? The one thing that really works on social media is leading with the problem, right? Just like we were creating those categories because we know patrons are looking for a specific answer. Instead of starting with that database name, which most people won't recognize anyway, start with something that feels familiar, right? Stuck on homework? Try XYZ, available for free with your library card, and then a click to action. Click the link in the comments, or click link in bio, or visit mpld.org to get started. That's all you need to do to teach your resource in your post, right? You're just cracking the door open and letting them come through the door. I think we sometimes get stuck because we feel like we need to explain everything, but less really is more on social media for this specific, in the specific instance for our e-resources. Complete information is where your website comes in. As far as visuals in social media go, yes, they make a difference. I think we all know that, right? When we scroll, think about what makes you pause. Is it an appealing image or video about something that interests you, for example? Like I said, they're scrolling very fast, and a clear visual can make them pause long enough to notice your message. So making your visuals so that they are repeatable, so they are consistent, so that they are recognizable to patrons, so you can bank on your credibility as the library can go a very long way. And if you have, for example, like a template that you can, update, for example, for those e-resources, it's consistent. And so it's easier to reproduce or to delegate to somebody else to update for you, which goes a long way. So my takeaway here is, through that longer lens, email, social media, and your website, they're all just different tools in your toolbox, right? And they all have a different job. So when we use them intentionally together, we can guide people to those resources without overwhelming ourselves and our patrons. The key is to make sure that those channels are talking to each other instead of working in isolation, right? So use each of them and have them stick to their job, right? You don't have to do everything everywhere. You just need to do it where it's going to make the most sense for your patrons. All right, that was a whole lot of 21st century digital marketing, and I don't want to run out of time. I do want to talk about another tool that, let's be honest, sometimes getting the word out digitally is great, but sometimes you really have to talk to actual human beings, right, to get that word out. And we can't have conversations with every single patron. That's not realistic. So sometimes we need a little help from our friends, right? Find people who are already working with the audience that we're trying to reach. And I promise you, even if that sounds like extra work to you, it's really not. If it's done right, it can be really simple, and it can be as quick as a short email or a quick phone call. So let me tell you another little story. Every fall, I meet new teachers in our school districts, and I show them how the library can support their students with library cards, research resources, field trips, you name it. The teachers share those resources with their students, and naturally families notice it and use it at home too. Just recently, I had a parent comment on some changes we'd made to our website and how awesome it was and how much more helpful it was. My point being that the partners you need are probably already in front of you, right? Schools, educators, community organizations, local nonprofits, and local businesses, for example. You start with who you already know and who you've already worked with, and use your e-resources to help them and their mission, which will increase your own usage. So I like to think about plain language again. We talked about this a little bit with our website, and it bears repeating here. When you're talking to someone outside the library, skip our library jargon, right? And just like with social media posts and website blurbs, we want to lead with the problem it solves or how it helps. And then people will remember the why before they'll remember the name. So sharing the load here is important. Think about who on your staff is naturally good at connecting with a particular audience. For example, I'm a former teacher, so it made sense for me to connect with schools and teachers. Someone else in your organization might be great at talking to local historians or community groups because of some other thing that they're interested in or that they do. You might have populations for whom English isn't their first language, and you might have a staff member who they may connect to. So matching that audience to the messenger can go a long way and can help delegate some of that load off of your shoulders, because it's not just what you say, it's who says it, and it's the way that we say it. Outreach works best when our e-resources aren't just floating out there, they're supporting something that's already happening. So for example, if you have a teacher who's planning a research project, you don't have to invent a new reason for them to use World Book. You can show them how it will help on that project. Or if your fire department, ours does an Autism Awareness Month campaign in April every year, we'll highlight consumer resource complete or some other things like that that helps their mission within the community. The point is that your resources aren't just things to push here, they're helpers that help make someone else's work easier. So if you position them that way, as this supports your mission, if you can share it with other people, then they're also doing some of that marketing work for you, and they're not even within your organization, which is pretty awesome. Thinking of those e-resources as helpers makes it a lot less intimidating, right? So one email highlighting a single resource, like Tumble Books for Teachers, for example, is usually more effective than trying to cover every single possible resource you have that might help that audience at once. You can create a simple handout or flyer with a QR code, leave it at a program, or share it at a partner organization's office. Those can be low effort ways for you, but people can scan and explore on their own time. And sometimes all it takes is kind of a quick mention at a meeting. I popped into a meeting about 2 weeks ago of our quarterly senior luncheon and just gave a quick, like, hi, how you doing? And I mentioned our new 55 and up resource, and that really paid off. It didn't need a whole song and dance. It just needed the right, audience to hear that message when they were interested in hearing it, right? One of the most important lessons I've learned is that you do not have to do it all. And when I say that, I don't just mean you personally. I mean kind of the royal you too, right? Treating outreach like spaghetti and throwing at every possible opportunity doesn't work, right? It's exhausting, and it takes away from other priorities that might actually, bear fruit in the long term. So set some priorities within your library. Maybe it's aligning with your strategic plan or some other goal your admin or marketing team has identified, and write it down. Have witnesses. This gives you framework and boundaries for saying no later. So if a niche opportunity sneaks in there that doesn't fit with those priorities, you can politely say, that's not in line with our current focus. And if they really push back, you can reply, if you insist on doing this, which of my existing priorities that we've already determined would you like me to drop in order to make room, right? Setting boundaries aren't just self-preservation for us, although I'm a big fan for myself personally. They're how intentional outreach actually works, by kind of eliminating the static and the chatter and just focusing on the messages that we're trying to convey makes them clearer and easier to hear and remember. So again, goal is not to be louder, it's to be clearer. And in my experience, outreach works best when we're helping with others who need them. So for example, a couple years ago, asking teachers to hand out flyers or to put posters up in their classrooms would have felt like a big ask. Now that I've had time to grow those relationships, they reach out to me and ask for calendars to put out. They ask me for things and how they can help the library. It's really awesome. And I know that I'm helping get they're getting our resources noticed. We're helping them promote their goals, which is pretty awesome. So it doesn't have to be complicated, it just has to be thoughtful. Programs are the same way, in that you have this kind of natural built-in moment for sharing things. The great thing about using these moments is that you've got an audience who's already there. They are interested and they already trust you. They are in your building, they're engaging in a program, they're at your history talk, or they're at your garden club, and now you can talk about that resource that you have, or that other those other databases that you have that might be relevant. And I'm kind of starting to run a little fast just because I want to give you a couple minutes real quick to ask questions. But just think about it this way, because when you have any kind of event or program and you have that moment to you're just planting that seed, right? The seed of here's a resource we have. It does not need to become a sales pitch. It just needs to be a quick mention. Maybe you've got a little half sheet or quarter sheet flyer they can pick up on their way out, but it does not have to be a song and dance. If your story time, maybe you've put up a story that was from BookFlix, for example, so parents know it's there, but you're not pushing it and, talking about all the benefits or whatever. You're showing them how it works in real time. So it's not a pivot or a hard sell. We're just looking for natural moments of extension for what they're already there for. And you can support that with those physical touch points, like something that they can take away with them later. That kind of allows for some cross-pollination. And you don't have to do a full demonstration because frankly, nobody wants to go and see a full demo on how, one specific EBSCO product works. Nobody really wants that. So even if it's just a quick mention, I have these couple of resources, they're really easy. Here's a QR code, in your own time. Usually planting that seed and letting them know that it's there is enough. And maybe even having some physical flyers or something along. So when they are walking out, they see it. They're, oh yeah, she mentioned that. I might follow up with that. That's a great touch point. And again, share the load. Make sure, I'm going to say it one more time, it's shared work, right? Nobody should be doing all of this alone. You're all working together because everybody has a specific area of expertise and a specific place where they work with the patrons. So if you can keep your whole staff in the loop and you can, help highlight an e-resource, they'll give you some touch points where it will resonate the most. So frontline staff, they're with patrons every day. They can help people access those resources. Your marketing admin staff knows the marketing channels where the message will best get out. If we can keep everybody coordinated, so we're all talking about the same thing at that same time, a lot of the time, your e-resources will get way more traction. And if you can have some kind of marketing toolkit where you have, some physical, we have graphic design where we try to build everything off of each other. So everything looks consistent and it's really easy to update. And they can become the foundation of everything that you pass out, put on the internet, et cetera, et cetera. It's really helpful. And if you've ever heard that adage, it takes seeing something 7 times to remember it. I try to build that into my marketing plan. Like if I'm going to have this graphic, I want that specific view to be what everybody sees, so they're not rebooting that memory to the resource, right? And we can reuse those, which is awesome too. And then after the program, this is a great time to send a quick email. A lot of the time they're still interested. They might have forgotten to pick up a flyer, or maybe you didn't have one at the time. It's a quick way to say, hey, we saw you were at that. We hope you enjoyed it. Here's that e-resource we mentioned. Here's a call to action button to click. It's quick follow-up email. It's a line or two. It's got one resource in it or a link, and it's ready to go. And you've got built-in relevance there. So once again, it's not about everything. You certainly don't need to do this every event. I know we host the same events month after month. We certainly don't need to do that every single time we have an event. But if you've got something that has a larger audience, you've got something that really ties in really nicely, that's the time to do it. Not every single story time, not every single tiny event. And all of these things we talked about today, they work everywhere, right? So if you are an academic library, if you are a public library, if you are a school library, all these little tweaks can work no matter where you are. And I think that's really important because those small little steps to change are so helpful and so much less exhausting. So I hope you guys kind of zipped through the end there because I knew we were hitting the end of the day and I don't want to keep you, or I know everybody's busy today, but I really am grateful for the time you spent with me today. And if anybody has any questions, if we don't have time, that's okay. Feel free to email me anytime. Devin, is there any? Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
This was fantastic. I didn't want to interrupt your fabulous presentation. But yeah, so we had some questions come in that were kind of helped out in the chat as the presentation was going. So When you have resources that
Mhm.
could be in two or more categories, do you put them in both or only one?
I think that's a really great question. And I think that kind of depends on probably your website's architecture a little bit. So if you have a really great big website and you have multiple pages, you have a page for genealogy and you have a page for homework helpers, it's okay to include those in multiple categories. I don't really see that being a problem. My the way that my I had mine built was it was all on one page. I don't have a really deep architecture on my website, but I don't really see a problem with doubling up because frankly, if I'm an adult and I'm looking for, you know, something, it can't hurt. It can't hurt to have it in two places. And I feel like you can try it and be comfortable, and see what makes you most comfortable. Or if it's complicated to add it twice, you don't have to. I think it kind of depends on what you and your team want to do with it. But I don't see any problem with it.
We did have a question about what are your thoughts on having a library databases page and then a separate page for our consortium provided databases from NC Live and resources? Should I look at trying to combine them?
I think that's a really great question. Now, NC Live has its own um, web page and architecture, right?
Yes, we have an A to Z list
That's
that
okay.
our public libraries might link out to
Okay.
potentially.
Okay. I think that's going to depend on a couple of things. We have a similar situation with EBSCO, and our state has provided us with a very robust list. And there is no way that I have the time or the energy to link every single one of them individually. So I don't necessarily see a problem with either linking out to somewhere else or even having like did you know that North Carolina provides, all these resources through NC Live and maybe even have a bulleted list of, I wouldn't even say the names of the databases or the resources, right? Because they're not going to necessarily know what those are. But you could even say they have resources on topics such as, and list some categories that NC Live has, and let them link out to that. That might be the easier way to go. Because the only other option really is then to kind of include those specific categories. And I've done this. For example, a couple of the EBSCO ones I specifically did put on our page, but I put them in my own categories. So I don't necessarily mention that they're brought to you by the state of Illinois or what have you. The state of Illinois has a page too that I don't love. So I have made it my own thing. I think it depends on just how much time and again, for how much usage you anticipate your patrons getting out of something. So you may want to consider what is maybe my number one thing that our patrons use, and is there something, say, in NC Live that would really have traction with my patrons? So maybe not every single thing, but maybe the ones that are really relevant to your patron base.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that where folks will pull out our access to Novelist and other
Yeah.
databases that make sense on
Yeah.
their resources pages. We have a question about contact info from Mary. Would you be willing to share your email for folks to get in touch with you?
Yes, please do. I've been in contact with Devin, and I'm actually on a medical leave right now. This is probably the most I've worked in 2 weeks. So I apologize, friends, if I've been a little um, faster or slower, just spasmy. I've barely interacted with humans in weeks. It's been awful. But I am really happy to reach out. I may not be as quick on the draw with email right now until I get back, and I don't have a date for that yet. But please feel free to send me an email anytime, even if 6 months from now you're like, oh, I have a question and I remember this woman talking. Please, I'm happy to anytime um, have an email conversation or pop on the phone. So,
Awesome. Well, Michelle, thank you so
of
much.
course, thank
We're
you.
so happy and grateful that you're able to join us today and lead this session. Folks, keep an eye out for that email from me tomorrow. I'll also link to the three other webinars that we have going on this month. But you really did such a great job of kicking off our marketing series today. So many great tips and things that even I'm considering for NC Live for our website and how we're promoting things. So All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this Tuesday afternoon. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and keep an eye out for that email from me.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.